Welcome to the 24 Hours of Past Business Analytics edition. This is the 7th session of the day. We will be seeing a session on dashboard design do's and don'ts presented by Stacia Meisner. I am Melissa Densack. I'll be your moderator for this session. I'm a SQL architect, and I'm very, very passionate about the inclusion of business analytics into PASS. It gives us very big opportunities to help solve many big problems and provide better ways to communicate these stories of data. Before we get into the session, I'd like to do a few housekeeping items, go over a couple of housekeeping items. For the first 45 minutes of the session, Stacia will go over her presentation, and we'll leave all Q&A to the end of the session. Also, I want to let you know that if you need any technical assistance, in the left side of your screen, there's a hand icon that can be raised if you need assistance. Make sure that your speaker volume is not muted. Hopefully you hear me at this time. And any questions that you have for later in the session can be typed in the Q&A box below. Also, in the top right corner of your screen, you can maximize this session so you may see things a little clearly. At this point, you can also follow the 24 Hours of PASS on the website, and any updates will be posted there. The format of the 24 Hours of PASS is 12 hours of live sessions, repeated with 12 hours of recorded sessions between today and tomorrow. Recordings will be available on February 11th. Please follow the conversation at PASS24HOP. We couldn't do these type of presentations without any of our sponsors. Our global sponsors, of course, Microsoft. And there's also 2 alliance sponsors, Time Extender and D&B. One of the major focuses for this year in PASS is business analytics, and there is a conference coming up April 10th through 12th in Chicago. We're very, very excited about that, and it offers some opportunities to hear other industry speakers such as Dr. Stephen Levitt, who is a co-author of Freakonomics. For attending this session today, you could use the code 24HOP13 by March 15th to get $150 registration. I hope I see you there. There's a variety of other ways to communicate with business analytics. There's in the conference. They're shown here, Facebook, Twitter. And the other way that you can get more content is to tune in and join up for the PASS virtual chapters. There are a variety of them available. The business analytics one that will be starting off within the next month that I'll be leading up, along with the big data, data architecture, master data, data quality, and professional development. These are lots of opportunities to learn more and more. Let's get on with the session today. Stacia Meisner. She is a SQL MVP and has a variety of other credentials. She has been on the speaking circuit for a bunch of years. I've seen her in many sessions. She's a consultant, an educator, author, a mentor, and also co-authored many technical books. So without further ado, we'll switch over to Stacia, and she can get on with her presentation.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Well, welcome everyone to today's session, Dashboard Design Do's and Don'ts. And I'm glad you're here with me today to learn a few things about dashboards. So we're going to start with an introduction to dashboards. What is it with dashboards? Dashboards mean different things to different people. So I'll start by generally describing why we use the dashboard metaphor, and then I'm going to show you where people go wrong with dashboards by reviewing some common design don'ts. And we'll do this in the context of the ugliest dashboard I could bring myself to create. Now, knowing what not to do with a dashboard is not the end of the story. We need to know what design techniques we can use to make a dashboard not only functional by providing information, but also how to communicate that information most effectively in dashboard form. And last, I'll introduce you to a Makeover action plan, laying out some very specific steps that you can take to give your dashboard a makeover. And even if you don't currently have a dashboard and you're starting for the first time, you can use this action plan to make sure that you deliver a dazzling dashboard. So, now if you've ever driven a car, you've probably seen a dashboard before. I sure hope you have. It contains gauges and lights, and all this is there to communicate information to you as you're driving down the road. And now somewhere along the line in the evolution of business intelligence and reporting and analytics and whatever you want to call this process of sharing information about your business to the people who are trying to run the business, the idea of using dashboards for business information was introduced. And some organizations do this very, very well, and others do not. So what's up with that? And why did dashboards become popular? Well, I'm going to probably date myself a little bit here, but I remember a time when the way we provided information to management about what was going on was to use green bar paper. And those of you who are listening who've seen green bar paper know who you are. Now, one of the jobs I had was to print off these reports for management. And these reports might contain summary information and detail information. And I can guarantee they almost never answered the question of the day or the week. And so management would have me write another report that was supposed to give them insight into what was going on. And this process was very labor-intensive, answering and asking questions and trying to piece together some understanding of the business. So what does that have to do with the dashboard? Well, let's look again at the dashboard in the car. What is its purpose? Well, in a nutshell, it gives you the most important information that you need to know while you're operating a moving vehicle. And because that vehicle's moving, your attention needs to be, first and foremost, focused on your surroundings. What's in front of you? What's behind you? And assuming that you have a fairly stable environment that you can look away for a moment, you can move your eyes briefly to that dashboard to get a quick assessment of what's going on in your environment. For example, it's important to know how fast you're going. Are you going too fast? Are you going too slow? And with this information available, you have what you need to know to accelerate or to ease up on the accelerator. And then another important piece of data on your dashboard is the amount of remaining fuel. Do you have enough gas to get where you're going? And then last, there might be lights that turn red if something needs your attention. Maybe you have an oil light or a temperature light go on, and now you've got to stop that vehicle as soon as possible and check the engine for a leak, and at the very least, let the engine cool down. So the dashboard is there and put together in such a way to give you these key pieces of information in such a way that you can just glance down, see what you need to see, and put your eyes back on the road while you decide what you're going to do about it, if you need to do anything about it, and then take the necessary action. You don't have time to read instructions about gauges and lights when you're looking at that dashboard. You just need to glance and go. So the information signaling a potentially dangerous situation cannot be ignored, and that shows up in red usually to let you know you better do something. Now think about this in a business context. There's lots of information being gathered each and every day that's useful and interesting. And there are reports of all kinds and tools for exploring data, and that's all fine. But the purpose of the dashboard is not to lead you to all those reports and tools or even to duplicate all of that on a web page, but rather to give you key bits of information that let you know. How fast are you going? Which implies that there's something to compare to. Just as we have a road speed to show whether we're going too fast or slow relative to the speed limit, we typically have performance goals that we can compare to. Are we moving towards those goals at a reasonable pace or too slowly? And with regard to fuel, do we have the resources we need to continue at the pace we're going? And then there's situations that could be classified as an emergency. Something needs to happen right now. And in general, these are the types of things that we find in a car dashboard. Everything we find there has analogous components in our business dashboards. Okay, so the problem with dashboards is that we don't always know the best way to go about building one. It's not a required part of your education, like reading, writing, and arithmetic. And then compounding the problem are the business intelligence vendors who added dashboarding functionality, and they got their slick demos to sell their software, and they're letting you know everybody's got dashboards, and you should too. But they don't teach you what makes a dashboard different from a report, or how design choices you make in your dashboard can make it effective or a disaster. So one of the best resources that I found for learning how to design effective dashboards is Stephen Pugh's book. It's called Information Dashboard Design. And in fact, Pugh has a lot of books that revolve around the use of data visualizations that I really recommend if you're responsible for developing reports also. So I've taken the 13 common mistakes that Pugh has identified in his book, and I created a very ugly dashboard in SharePoint 2013 to use as our beginning point. So let's stop here and take a look. And we'll find our ugly dashboard here. So hopefully you can see this. And it's nice and red, because red really gets your attention, right? And now to see stuff, I need to kind of scroll here because not everything fits on my screen. And don't we have this lovely background with the AdventureWorks logo sitting back there? And we have to scroll through, and we have charts here that have scale breaks in them, and we have this table that's got some fine detail on the percentage sales that we have broken down by sales territory, and we have variance. We can see that we have this blue line indicates our sales, and the quota, this is the target, and we can see we're not meeting the target. And we go through all the different kinds of charts here. They're spread out. I have a table that's showing me I have my quarter-to-date information, but what does that mean? Is it any good? What's my target? Is this number higher or lower than I expected? And then we have the ubiquitous pie chart, and of course everybody loves pie charts. So then we have scorecards and gauges and charts. And we just scroll and scroll and scroll, and so that is
Stacia, I need to interrupt. We're not able to see your screen.
You're not able to see my screen, okay? Let's try this again. Let me know if you can see.
We can now, yes.
Okay, super. Sorry about that. So this is the ugly dashboard, and I'll just give you the little nickel floor here because we're going to look at these things in more detail as we go through here. So problem number one is I have to scroll through this entire thing. I can see that there's a lot of elements here. I have charts and a very red color. I have this AdventureWorks logo in the background. I've got charts with scale breaks. I've got tables that have percentage breakdown with an incredible amount of detail here. I've got different kinds of charts, pie charts, line charts, bubble charts, tables that show where we are quarter to date, but it doesn't give me any context. I've got gauges and indicators and a lot of information here, very full dashboard and very colorful dashboard as well, kind of cluttered and but not particularly useful. I'm not quite sure what I should be looking at and so forth. So that's, I could probably work a little harder and make it a little bit uglier, but I think you get the idea there. So let's go back and look at what's going on here more closely, point by point. So problem number one that we have with dashboards that we need to resolve is how to manage navigation, or to put it more succinctly, don't rely on navigation to display the dashboard. So I call it navigation interference when the user has to scroll either vertically or horizontally to see everything that's on that dashboard, or even when you use multiple pages like the Performance Point dashboard can set you up for. Now, I'm not saying that you cannot include links that lead the viewer to other related information, but what I am saying is that the dashboard you design needs to fit on a single page comfortably, and if it doesn't, rethink your dashboard. And again, remember what's on your car dashboard. It's not every piece of data known to mankind or the car manufacturer about your car. It's what you need to know right now while you're operating it. Another problem often seen in dashboards is the lack of appropriate context. So, for example, simply viewing a list of quarter-to-date sales by sales territory doesn't help me know whether those numbers are good or bad. So without the information in the dashboard, I'm forced to go look up a report that lists the forecast by territory and then do some calculations to figure out how close or how far away I am for each territory and the goals that I have. So that really defeats the purpose of the dashboard, which is supposed to tell me that information at a glance. So even if the dashboard displays comparative information that I need to see where we are, we can also fail to include supporting details. That can be a problem as well. So here I have gauges that do a little more than tell me that one salesperson's margin is in the green zone and another person's in the red zone, but I don't know how good the good is or how bad the bad is without some sort of scale. Now, of course, I could also argue that a gauge is probably not the best type of visualization for this information also, but we will save that for a later point. Then we have the problem of missing context when we have, the opposite problem of missing context when we have too much detail in our dashboard. So, and there's many different ways that this could be done. So, for example, I pointed out this table that's got very precise data, lots of decimal places there, but how many are really necessary to convey whether that's a good number or a bad number? And also, not shown here, but another example of too much detail would be having lots of data or text or supporting information that's, just adding to the visual noise on the page. And so I'll say again and again, remember that the user should be able to glance and look away and retain the gist of the situation. They shouldn't have to read the fine print to know what they need to know. Another type of dashboard design problem is the way that information is presented, which can occur in many ways, such as using the wrong measurement. So let's say that one of the metrics that AdventureWorks wants to monitor on the sales dashboard is the trend in variance between actual sales and sales quota. In other words, we have this target. How close are we to it? Are we ahead of the goal or behind the goal? And a popular way to visualize comparisons over time is to use a line chart like you see here. The blue line represents the sales, and the orange line represents the quota. And we can easily see that sometimes sales are well below the quota and occasionally above the quota. But we cannot get a sense of how significant the variance is by just looking at the gap between these two lines. A better way, if the goal is to say what's the degree of above or below, number one, we should be using percentages instead of raw numeric values there, and we might choose a different type of chart to focus on the degree of variance. Is it above or below, and even use colors to indicate that. And I'll show you an example of that later. So variance is something where we're not measuring the right thing, or not showing the right metric in our chart. Another problem is to introduce variety for the sake of variety. So the use of different chart types can often introduce greater confusion than it just adds than adding our aesthetic value. So it really requires more mental work to try to figure out what is the story with each chart and to figure out is there any relationship. And certainly if there were a relationship, it wouldn't be obvious when we're using different chart styles here. So it's better to be consistent with our use of color and our use of chart types and just live with being boring if our message is not getting lost through variety. Okay, then another problem is just using the wrong visualization, something entirely inappropriate. And all the major vendors will allow you to select all types of charts, but that's not necessarily a good thing. One of the things we like to pick on, those of us who do data visualizations a lot, we pick on the pie chart. Lots of people love pie charts, but they're not always the best way to compare things. Now, if you're comparing 2 or 3 categories, maybe you can get away with it. The problem is that our eyes cannot really tell the relative size difference of pie shapes when we start getting too many slices. So, here in this example, you can see that the pie slice at the top is clearly greater than half the total pie. But if you have 20 pie slices, the differences between some of the slices is just going to be more difficult to discern than others. And another problem is the use of 3D charts. 3D is just flash. It is not particularly helpful for making comparisons, and in some cases, as you see here, it can even hide data points. Now, dashboard design is always a balancing act, and there are some bad design techniques that we can do that interfere with the way that people process information. So, for example, in this design created by my evil dashboard designing twin, helpful information was added to the report to enhance the legend. So we have the pie slices, and we have the colors, each relating to a sales territory, and we have the percentage values. And the problem is that as a viewer, your eye has to travel back and forth from pie to legend, pie to legend, pie to legend to get each data point and kind of process this information. So if it's important to know what the specific values are, what each slice represents, and what the percentage of the total is, then it's probably better to do something like a data point and a label on the pie itself rather than moving the viewer's eye to a different location. Legends aren't particularly helpful. It depends on the situation. So one thing to bear in mind as I point out certain mistakes, there's always the consultant's backdoor is it depends. So the rules can be broken, but we have to be conscientious about why we are breaking those particular rules. All right, so values in the legend interrupt us. We also have another problem with the way that charts get built. If we build the charts incorrectly, we can actually skew results. So I pointed out in that ugly dashboard we have these scale breaks. And the problem with scale breaks is that on the one hand they're there to the purpose is really to make it easier for small values not to get lost in the chart when they're outnumbered by other values that are much, much, much larger. But the problem is that our perception doesn't know what to do with those scale breaks. So our natural inclination as viewers is to say, wow, look at this. France is roughly half of the United Kingdom, which in turn is roughly half of the United States. And that's just simply not true if you were to look at the raw data. Excuse me. But you can also skew the results if you choose to start your numeric scale at a value other than 0. It will have a similar effect as a scale break. What will happen is the length of your columns will not be the true relative length as we're comparing one value to another. So the column length implies a quantitative value, and if the true height is not represented correctly, then our perception is all off and we're making incorrect comparisons. Now, another problem is if you choose to place items on the dashboard page incorrectly, that can also be bad design. So notwithstanding the problem with having to scroll to see everything, let's assume that we could fit all these items on the same page with some creative design. You need to factor in how the viewer's eye is going to flow from one item to another. And depending how you arrange items, you can actually disrupt the perception process. So, for example, if you want the user to compare things, you might put them in a sequence top-down rather than requiring the eye to travel from left to right. Also, bear in mind that most of the time, depending on what country that you're in, you think about the direction that people normally read. Here in the United States, we start at the top left, we move left to right, and then we move down. So you want to think about what is the natural sequence of eye movements that someone would naturally have. And then you would arrange things. You would put your most important items in the top left. You don't require people to look at everything else. And then, oh, by the way, down here in the bottom right-hand corner, where you're probably not going to get to, is the most important thing that you really needed to see. So think about how items are arranged. Another problem is how they're emphasized. How do various elements compete for attention? So we can use decorative features to overly emphasize one feature or another, or we can choose not to emphasize an element at all and still to lead our viewers to something that they really need to know. So here's an extreme example of inappropriate emphasis. All the colors here are competing for our attention. So we have the blue fill for the chart title and the legend, and that really pops out against that red background, but it really doesn't contribute to any meaning here. They're just supporting elements, and yet from a color perspective, those are the elements that are being overly emphasized. So anytime you use particularly styling any particular styling technique, the eye is naturally drawn to those elements first. That could be by using bold fonts or different colors or adding lines, underlining text, italic font, or even placing elements inside of borders. So the bottom line here is to use styling with caution. Don't think of styling as aesthetics, but as something that adds meaning to your visualizations here. Another problem is clutter. Clutter detracts from the dashboards, and it can come in many different forms. So, for example, if you simply repurpose a report that you have by adding it as an item on a dashboard page, there could be residual stuff in there that's perfectly reasonable to put into a report, but it's just merely clutter on our dashboard. That would be things like report titles and logo images that might be in our report. Also, any kind of background images, whether in your report or on your dashboard page, they're competing with real information for your eye's attention. And frankly, there's probably not much need to use a background image in a standard report, but I can make a case for a watermark in some situations. However, in a dashboard, a nice clean background is the best possible design. And another way clutter might appear is in a series of links that's intended to lead the viewer to other content elsewhere. So having links is not necessarily a bad thing, but tying up valuable real estate on the dashboard page with links that are variations on a theme is definitely a design don't. So earlier, I called out purposely emphasizing information by using color. But now the focus is simply on the use of color in general, so it's important to choose colors correctly. So certain colors, like red, are considered hot colors, and they really should be avoided. These are colors that are demanding your attention. Your eye can't help it. It's just, look at me, and it's distracting from the message, the communication that you're trying to communicate. Now, on the other hand, if there's something that really needs attention, then color of red would be a good thing to use in that context. So you have to be careful and picky about what colors are going to be used. Last, the number one problem in creating a dashboard is just calling it plain old ugly, to put it bluntly. So if people are put off by the design of the dashboard, if the appearance doesn't lend itself well to usability of information, people are not going to use the dashboard. And if people aren't using the dashboard, what are they going to do to get the information that they need? They're going to go get it elsewhere, and they're going to spend time, more time than necessary, to go and gather that information that could be presented more efficiently by using a dashboard. Okay, so now that we know what not to do, let's take a look at some proper techniques, and we'll do that by reviewing some of the principles of effective dashboard design. First and foremost, always remember the whole reason why we're creating a dashboard. It has a purpose. Always stick to that purpose. Number two, we're going to look at some key design principles to keep in mind above all else. And last, we're going to review the principles related to how we arrange information for a dashboard that facilitates the best communication possible. Essentially, how to get the information point across effectively. Now, as I've mentioned a few times already, the most important thing you can do when working on your dashboard design is to remember the purpose of a dashboard. I mentioned Stephen Few earlier in his information dashboard design book. He has probably the best definition of a dashboard, and he studied a lot of these things and came up with the following statement. It is a visual display of the most important information needed to achieve one or more objectives, which fit entirely on a single computer screen, so it can be monitored at a glance. So the key elements are here, it's visual. That means we're minimizing text and focusing on how do we represent information in some type of chart form. We are distilling that information down to the most important information. We are not writing a novel with our dashboard. It is typically in support of objectives. We have some goals. We're in business to make money or save money. How are we working on that? Are we being successful? Is there a problem? How do we know? So that information that we're communicating needs to be linked to some problem we're trying to solve or some problem we're trying to avoid. It needs to be succinct. It needs to be something that we can see on a single screen because it's a dashboard. That means we can look away, and we've retained the key bits of information that we need to go make a decision, to go get something done. That is the dashboard's purpose. So after you've gathered up all of your information and decided what needs to be in the dashboard, you need to come back and revisit this purpose and say, have I conformed to this purpose? Okay, so before we even think about the specifics of what should go into a dashboard, there's two key design principles to keep in mind. Number one, minimize the non-data elements. Non-data elements would be things like chart titles, legends, axis labels, anything that's not necessary, minimize it. You could be really ruthless and just simply get rid of it. That would be the ideal. But sometimes you can't get rid of everything because, remember, we have to have context. So if it has to stay, reduce its emphasis. You do that by making it smaller. Change the color. Use a soft gray or a soft brown, something that isn't going to, we call it neutral colors. And you want to de-emphasize it. So the things that are important would be noticeably a different a weight, bold versus not bold, and maybe slightly different color. If you have borders around things, that is an emphasis statement. So we would remove borders to anything that we can. If it's not data, minimize it or get rid of it. And so the opposite of that would be, if it's data, maximize it. Draw attention to that. Yes, not all data needs to be there, so we have to be a bit ruthless with our data and eliminate anything that does not help us understand immediately what's going on. We want to draw attention to the most important items. Remember, how we do that is through emphasis. We want larger fonts, brighter colors. If we need to group things together, we can add lines and borders around those things to draw attention to that. But remember, it's always important to be clear about the purpose of your dashboard. That way you can be clear about which data needs to be included and which data to be excluded. So just remember that dashboard metaphor. Remember how fast are we going? Do we have enough fuel to get there? Is there an emergency that requires immediate attention? And so on. So it's important not only to consider what needs to stay, but how to differentiate the more important data from the rest. Let's go this direction. Okay, so next we need to think about how information is arranged on the page. So we're aiming for a single page, and the most important thing to think about as we're gathering information is that it needs to be related information. We won't want to have random things from all over the place. It needs to be relationships, and if there are things that are not necessarily connected, but it's important information to see, then there are things that you can do to kind of group the things that are related. You can use visual techniques to group them. But we want relationships to organize our data. That could be by function, that could be by entity or by data source, but think about what's related, group those things together, and kind of create white space or borders or something to separate them visually from other things. So that's how we can distinguish our groups. Then we have, after we get the data elements out there, the things that we need to communicate, then you enhance that message. Is there anything that would be supporting information, comparative measures, things that let us know where we stand relative to our goals or to a different point in time if we're interested in trends? We want to be using percentage values. They're better at communicating differences than using raw differences. Another thing that's important in your arrangement of information is be consistent. Don't be all wild and crazy with colors and fonts and things. We want to basically minimize a lot of variation in colors because any kind of difference there is immediately going to pop out and look like it needs attention when it's just merely a different color, and color wouldn't necessarily have meaning. Another thing that you might want to think about is to enhance the dashboard with supporting information that might be found elsewhere, maybe links to details, maybe direct through to other reports, or enable the user to filter the information. Maybe we're looking at an entire company view of information, and then we want to allow the user to focus on a single department or a single sales territory, just as an example. Okay, so let's say you have the world's ugliest dashboard and you're ready to make some improvements. What do we need to do? So there's kind of an action plan. From a high-level perspective, that means we need to decide first what the goal is by defining the type of dashboard that's required and the audience for whom that dashboard is intended. We generally don't have a one-size-fits-all dashboard. And then the next step is to determine which metrics to include. So the temptation here is often to include everything, but it's really important to develop some focus. Another important step is the selection of the appropriate visualization for the information that you want to communicate. And then next, you want to enhance the dashboard with additional features. Here's where we provide a pathway to get additional information or next steps or more analysis that helps the viewer do something with the information that's on that dashboard. And above all, it's important to adhere to the dashboard golden rule. Keep it simple. So the right frame of mind in dashboard design is not what more can I add, but rather what can I take away. So, all dashboards are not created equal. There are 3 types, each of which has a different focus, a different audience, and as a result, an inherently different design. So the first step in your dashboard design makeover is knowing that first there is the strategic dashboard. And this type of dashboard is intended to be simply a summary of the overall health of the organization. It should show how well the business is performing with regard to long-term goals and strategic objectives. So in a sense, it answers the question, how much fuel do we have? Are we above or below the speed limit? And an important aspect of the strategic dashboard is that it's historical data. We're looking at the last month, the last year, and most likely comparing that period to other points in time or even further back in history. A strategic dashboard is focused on an executive audience. It means that it doesn't need a lot of detail, and it focuses on the bottom line questions that executives have. However you want to phrase it, however you want to measure it, are we making money or are we saving money? Now another type of dashboard is the operational dashboard. And this is a dashboard that presents a snapshot of what's going on now. It needs to be crystal clear, like the dashboard in your car. You can't have people making assumptions about what an indicator means because an operational dashboard requires action sooner rather than later. Now, one way that you can help viewers take action is to incorporate links or information, such as contact information in the dashboard, real code, other reports, and so forth. Now, an operational dashboard differs from our strategic dashboard in that it's real-time, typically, what's happening now. And it's there because we need to know what's going on so we can do something. Maybe we have a call center and we're monitoring the call distribution and a backlog starts building up. Or maybe you manage IT for a large company and the mail servers are starting to go down all over the place. So this is the type of dashboard that's on someone's screen continuously rather than checked in on a periodic basis. Now, this type of monitoring, by the way, tends to be focused on data from a single department in contrast to the strategic dashboard, which tends to be more of a comprehensive view of the organizational health. Then we have the analytic dashboard, and this is the type of dashboard where we want to present specific types of information that entice the viewer to explore. It shows trends over time, and it compares where we are now to targets that we have in place. And furthermore, it allows the user to explore further, to perform root cause analysis, to dig deeper into the data to find out why something happened. And an important aspect of the analytic dashboard is that we give the viewers a way to track what happens next. It's not just a way of seeing what's going on, but also to collaborate with others so we can learn from what's happened and develop a process to capitalize on that insight or course-correct a problem, which, incidentally, is a topic that I'll be discussing at the Past Business Analytic Conference in Chicago in April, where we're talking about BI and collaboration. So regardless of which dashboard type you select, don't take a cookie-cutter approach. As I said earlier, all dashboards are not created equal. You really do need to factor in the unique needs of your audience and know what type of dashboard is suitable, and keep that in mind as you move to the next steps in the dashboard design process. Now, for the tricky part, identifying the metrics. First and foremost, you need to be very clear about the real question that needs to be answered so that you can choose the proper metric. It seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how often this trips people up and how often people disagree about this in an organization. So to boil it down, you need to be clear about what success looks like in terms of a number within the scope of the dashboard, whether the metrics are for the entire organization, for your department, or just for you. And to come at it another way, because of course you need those warning lights to pop up to warn of danger, you need to know what defines a problem. Now, as you work through this process, think about the top 5 to 10 metrics that help define success or problems that are critical to know. And don't worry if you don't have that many, because that's okay. Simple is good. If you have 100 metrics, you need to think about prioritizing which of those metrics truly matter. And if you still have more than 10, then group those metrics into separate dashboards. And as you work through the metrics identification process, you also need to consider how much your audience needs to know so that you can provide the proper detail. That means having the summary information that's relevant. It needs to encompass the time frame that helps them understand whether things are moving in the right or wrong direction. But it does not need to be a summary of all time or even certain periods of time that aren't helpful for moving forward. And whatever isn't immediately relevant, have a way to access that through a link to supporting details if it's useful to know, but not needed for that particular decision point. Similarly, you need to think about what the next logical step for your audience should be so that the dashboard leads them to the proper action. Know what happens next and add information or action to the dashboard to support that. So in this step, the most important thing you can do is to focus on the goals of your dashboard and ensure that it contains the critical information to support those goals. So the selection of the right visualization is also crucial to good dashboard design, and unfortunately this is where people don't really get the right education. They see something flashy in a vendor presentation, or they play around with features in software that they have without really understanding why some chart types are better than others for communicating certain types of information. And obviously today we don't have time to go into those details, but I will share something that someone else brought to my attention. It's called the thought sorter, and you can see the URL in the upper right-hand corner there to get this chart for yourself and study it a little more closely. I know it's hard to see all of the details on this, but what I want you to get is just the big picture here, to focus on the generality. So in the center of the slide, it has the question, what would you like to show? And then surrounding that, you can go one of 4 directions: comparison, distribution, composition, and relationship. So let's say that we want to do a comparison, because that's a very common thing to do in an analytic dashboard. So we move up, and then from there we break out into 2 branches. To the left is a comparison among items, and to the right is a comparison over time. And if we want to use the over time, then, well, that breaks down 2 ways. On the left is the breakdown over many periods, and to the right is to few periods. So let's say that I want to look at sales over a few years. Then following this path, I would go to that upper right-hand corner, and I might choose the column chart if I only have one category, like a single sales territory, or if I have a few categories, maybe a couple of sales categories. But if I have lots and lots of categories to compare over time, then a line chart is going to be better. So a line chart helps me compare many categories for a few periods over time. And incidentally, another resource to help choose the right chart design is Stephen Few. I keep bringing up his name, but he's got several books on the topic of data visualization that can help. He doesn't just focus on dashboards, but he actually gets into the whole mental process of how we process information visually and how chart layout helps or hurts that process. So So you're not done just because you add visualizations to the dashboard. You next need to consider the type of support and interaction that would actually enhance the dashboard. And this would be relevant primarily for your analytic and operational dashboard. Remember to keep your audience in mind. So, for supporting information, think about adding a section for outstanding issues or tasks to be performed. Maybe we have a schedule of due dates for tasks and the people responsible. On the other hand, don't include this if it doesn't make sense. At all times, bear in mind what helps people act on the information in the dashboard. Another thing to consider is adding in a mechanism that enables the viewer to filter information. So, for example, you could add in a web part in SharePoint that prompts the user to make a different selection. And you can connect that filter web part to several different web parts that are related. But the key here is, though, that you don't want to force the user to do a lot of work to filter. In other words, don't have 10 different filters on the dashboard. Then you might have links. You might have drillable reports. So think about what the viewer will want to do online in response to seeing good news or bad news, and then build in some type of action that helps them do that. And whatever you do, make it obvious and make it easy to do. Last but not least, keep it simple. Really, really start simple, especially if the use of dashboards is new to your audience. Start with a handful of metrics. 3 is a good number. Don't get stuck on point-in-time comparisons. In other words, don't compare this month to last month and leave it there, but help the viewer see trends. Show trends over several months because that helps provide context. Also, don't feel compelled to use every feature in a dashboard just because it's there. You use features because it helps communicate information effectively. Now, another thing that's important to keep in mind is that change is inevitable. It's okay to start simple and make changes later. I am a big proponent of involving users in the process all along the way, which might sound like it's the obvious thing to do, but you'd be surprised how often I go into places where that's not the case. But to get it right, you really do have to involve the users. Let them see it, touch it, use it before you finalize it. Get their feedback and make changes accordingly. And remember that business changes, sometimes quickly. What's important today might change in a few months, so bear in mind that the metrics that we're watching could change. And if that happens, make sure that everyone that's using the dashboard knows that things have changed. People can go into autopilot mode with their dashboards, just glancing at the dashboard, which of course is what we want them to do, but if we've made changes on them, that's not really fair. They could be processing the information incorrectly. So we need to make changes obvious when we've made significant changes to that. So, after all of that, remember the ugly dashboard at the beginning. Let's see if I can manage to get the good one up here. Now, I made it very simple. There's still some more things that I can do with this. Before I change this over, I'm going to, on my blog, blog.datainspirations.com, I'm going to take this information because there's a lot more that I could explore here than we have time for, but I'm going to show you the before and after shots of the various pieces of the dashboard and probably enhance what I'm going to show you a little bit more to build in the actions and the links and so forth. But I want you to see bit by bit how we actually do a dashboard makeover. So on that note, let me switch over to the screen share and let's get over to a different dashboard. Now, can I get confirmation that you can see this before I go babbling along?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. So here I have worked with my Adventure Works managers, and I said what's really critical, and the things for our sales department, they said we really are interested in our quotas, how well we're doing on that for the year, and we're really interested in monitoring margins. So we have focus in this dashboard. Notice it's a very clean white background. There's only 4 things to look at here. And wow, that's red. I said red was bad, right? Well, actually in this case this is bad because you can see this is variance And for each of our categories, I don't know how well your resolution there is, so that's kind of the bad side of presenting. But if you are sitting in front of a monitor and looking at this, you can see that we have 4 categories: accessories, bikes, clothing, and components. And you can see that each one of these has a red bar. And the 0 actually is on the far right side, and as we move to the left on the scale on the bottom, we're actually going into negative numbers. So the very bottom bar there for components has a greater than a negative 60% variance, meaning we're not selling very well against our goal for components. All of them are doing badly, and that's why there's a red. If we were to switch to a different year and we had some positive, we were moving towards our quota, we'd actually, above 0, we'd actually be a different color here. So the red is definitely grabbing attention, and it definitely means something. It's, hey, we have a problem. Now, we also need to pull back and see trends. So the quota variance by year down at the bottom shows us trending over time using a line chart. I can see colors there. And actually, if I point to these, if I need more information, see if it's going to cooperate with me, I can point to a place on the line and actually get more information. So that's kind of that building in context without being in your face about it. In the far right side, this is an analytic chart. So this is taking advantage of Performance Point where I can actually change things here. I can select different measures. I can pivot this, I can apply different filters and so forth. So I can interact with this chart in some ways here, and similarly for the margin chart on the bottom. So at a glance, I can do some comparison across my sales territories and so forth, but basically I will leave it at this so that we have some time for some questions. But just the main takeaway is the less clutter, more subdued colors, less, more focus and so forth. And again, on my blog, we'll get into more of the details. So on that note, I will stop the sharing and we'll get this back to our slides. And now is the time for questions, if any.
Okay. At the beginning of very beginning of your session, you mentioned an author. I'm assuming that was Stephen Few,
That's correct.
Who has the book. Okay.
Yeah, so that name is Few, F-E-W. And anything you can read about Few is great. Obviously, another author, if you're really interested, gets into even more visual communication theory is Edward Tufte. T-U-F-T-E. He's also another great one, but I think for more practical, put it to use today in your SharePoint or reporting services environment, I think Stephen Few would be more practical.
Okay. What do you consider non-data elements?
Non-data elements would be anything that's not coming from your data, she says. Meaning things like labels, report titles, lines, things that it's not a numeric quantitative value. Although I kind of hesitate to imply that data is always quantitative, a number, but generally speaking, that's what it's going to be. So the legend, so those tick marks, it's just anything you look at and you say, is that a number, is that something that gives me information about I'm doing well or I'm not doing well? If it's not, that's a non-data, it needs generally to go away, unless it's helping me interpret something.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next question I have here. From Donica. She noticed that you didn't keep the legend colors the same in the pie chart. Wondering if there was a reason why.
I didn't keep the legend colors. Well, they were. I don't want to switch around the slides too much, but I tried to match the colors as much as I could. I did with the pie chart. If it was in the ugly pie chart, then there was some trickiness there to get the colors Right. There was the attempt to match things there. So I'm probably not understanding the question entirely.
I'm going to go to the next question here. There's several questions on when the slides will be available, and I believe that the slides will be available via a PDF on the 24 Hours of Past site after the sessions.
Right.
Next question I have is, I think you spoke to this, but they're asking if you can talk about your feelings on dashboards versus scorecards.
Yeah, scorecards. Scorecards are, I think, they're different purposes, and a dashboard is, as I've mentioned all through the last hour, is intended to give me an at-a-glance view of something that's going on. Is it good or bad, and what do I need to do about it? Whereas a scorecard really has a different purpose. And honestly, in people, I don't know a lot of people who are using it. They start down this path thinking that they want a scorecard, but they wind up deciding that they don't really want the scorecard. But a scorecard is a way to, as the name implies, to say I have a value and I'm comparing it to a target. How close or far away from that am I? Whereas a dashboard is not always representing how close or far away from a goal. So a dashboard could be any bits of information that help me know I need to do something. And though I said it needs to be linked to goals, it's not necessarily displaying the good or bad progress for the goals. So a dashboard would be a looser, more general kind of gathering of information, where a scorecard is very specific to that. Now, another thing, specific to performance point scorecards, there's some limitations there in how you can lay things out. And so I find most of the time, and this is true even for the dashboards, that the type of layout or the type of behavior that we want is I can control things to such a greater degree within reporting services. I can control color, look, size, appearance, and so forth. And the other tools, the SharePoint, BI stuff, the performance point stuff, I have more limitations on what I can do. So we find that reporting services, embedding that within the SharePoint environment generally gets us the look and feel that we're achieving or striving for, rather.
Would you recommend that for a simple dashboard? A person is asking, there's so many tools available from Microsoft, Power View, SharePoint, what you just mentioned. Would you recommend that for a simple one, or?
It boils down to what you need, okay? So who's your audience? What are the expectations? What's the skill set? So if it's a super simple dashboard, then maybe Performance Point is adequate, although there's some skills there. So even Excel, and I didn't introduce that in here, but you could have Excel charts as well embedded as web parts. So I err on the side of what tool is going to give me what the user wants. And as I alluded to earlier, I lean towards reporting services because it gives me that pixel-perfect kind of layout. But if you can accomplish your goal with Excel workbooks and throw them into Excel services and show them up as web parts and it looks clean and simple, the bottom line is, does it communicate information? Are you able to put it together in a way that's simple, a repeatable process? Are people able to get it? To get at it, are they able to understand it? That's going to be my deciding factor above and beyond anything else.
Do you think is it a good practice to include historical data in dashboards?
Generally. So again, we have to understand what is the purpose of the dashboard. What is it intended to convey? Who's the audience? And so I would say generally historical data is good if our purpose is to analyze, or we're doing a strategic dashboard. Sometimes with operational dashboards, however, the emphasis is not so much on historical data, but rather what's happening now. We don't really care what happened yesterday. It's what's happening today. That's the center of our attention. So you really need to understand what is the message that's really central to deciding whether that data is helpful or not.
We have some more questions coming in about Excel dashboards, if they're able to be displayed in SharePoint, and some more talk about pivot tables within Excel, and what's
Yes, so, well, I don't know about Excel dashboard per se, but yes, I can take an Excel chart, Excel workbook, and I can display it in SharePoint, and I can also do pivot tables very nicely. I don't get the full functionality. Oh, well, actually, I haven't looked at it in 2013 should have added in the more functionality, so I take that back. With the Excel 2013 and SharePoint 2013, they should get the full functionality. And I think with the colors on the last chart, the colors, it was not purposeful with the colors, but they should have matched.
All right, I think we're pretty much wrapping up all the questions. Thank you so much for giving us so much content and a large thought process into building these type of components.
All right, thank you, everyone. There is another session starting, so I hope you're learning lots today and through all the remaining sessions.